Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Breakthrough Innovation. With us today, we have JL Heather, who's my co-host, and our guest today is Karen Chao. Karen is a visionary technology executive. She's been dedicated to advancing operational excellence through innovative products and services. Today, she's the Chief Product Officer at Flowspace, where she's led a lot of transformative products, which includes the industry's first AI-powered supply chain analysts. Karen personally has this remarkable ability to drive impact in a lot of industries traditionally underserved by modern technology. So she's tackled some complex challenges in fleet management and e-commerce and fulfillment, and she excels at building and scaling those solutions despite some of the industry constraints. She leverages creativity and strategic execution to drive a lot of the meaningful business outcomes. So Karen, we're so glad to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I think just to get us kicked off, you've had a number of different roles in the industry, a lot of product leadership roles at Apple and Booster Fuels and Flowspace. Talk to us about your career path and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking the question. I'd like to say it was very intentional, but to be honest, I don't think careers, maybe there's some people who have very clear plans. For me, I come from modest means as a daughter of a single mom immigrant. And so a lot of my focus was really around getting a great education, getting into workforce, and just having financial security. And so my first job out of college was actually in the supply chain. I worked at Cisco Systems for several years. And at some point, I thought to myself, oh my God, this can't be the rest of my life. This is so horrible. I have to do this career. And so I started looking around and I started seeing okay, what kind of jobs are really interesting to me? And I was working with product people and I thought, oh, it's kind of a cool, cool gig. It's very cross-functional. They seem important. And so, I went back to grad school and then I transitioned into it. And, there's times where I find a lot of joy in it. And there's times where I'm oh, why did I pick this role? It's so contentious, everyone's always you're not doing enough. But I fell into product management and I found quite a bit of joy in it. So over the course of time, I've worked at all sorts of different industries, different business models. And for me, what drives me is really around learning. I really enjoy learning. And so I think product roles are really you have to be very curious, you have to learn. And so you come to a new industry, you learn the industry, you learn about customers, you're trying to figure out how to problem solve. And it's almost it's just challenging and fun. And then you also work with a lot of people because that's how you get things done and collaborate and talk to customers. And so I really enjoyed it. Would I have picked it out to start? I don't know. I don't think I knew about it, but I'm happy where I am. I'm happy where I landed.
JL and I are firm believers that work should be fun. You should feel some joy at work. There's no reason why work has to feel like a slog every day.
Yes. And I used to do that the first job. Yeah.
Well, I also like the idea that you may not know the destination, but you kind of can figure out the direction. And you can kind of wayfind as you go. I don't think anyone looks back on a career that's longer than a year or two and goes, yep, I connected all those dots from the beginning to end. No problem. I think we connect them in retrospect, but the plan falls apart pretty quick otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
How has that career path working in arguably some very different industries, very different companies, how has that shaped your personal leadership style?
Yeah. Great question. So I've worked at a mix of some really big companies like Fortune 500, as well as very small, I want to say Series A to Series C, typically, stage startups. So companies where there's a lot of process and the type of product management is very different to be effective. And at startups, a lot of times you're, just trying to figure out how to get stuff done. There's a lot of ambiguity, 0 to 1. You don't have a lot of resources. And so the way you are effective is very different in different roles. And so I think for me, I'm very adaptable. I've seen a common mistake where people kind of have a playbook where they come in, it's got you're do X, Y, and Z, and then you have this process and, because some companies have different, companies have different challenges and different needs. And so you got to adapt with those needs and you have to figure out how to solve those problems. And so for me, it's all about adapting to the problem. Like even my time at Flowspace, I've been here for about 2.5 years now. And when I first came in, the problems I was dealing with is very different than the problems I have today because the market's changed, the business has grown, it's evolved, and the needs are different. My approach is always to be like kind of understanding what I need to bring to the table to help the business.
I mean, I like that perspective about everything changing. And so you can't use the cookie cutter approach. I was talking with a colleague yesterday and just talking about how the cookie cutter approach can't be successful in the long run. It just maintains the status quo. And we live in a world that is continuously changing. I think in particular, we've seen so much impact from AI just in the last year and months. I mean, just an amazing amount of impact. So I want to know from your perspective, how do you balance that automation and AI with human decision-making, particularly as you're looking at supply chain operations?
Yeah, great question. So it really depends on the power of the technology and where it's going. For example, when AI first came out, we were really excited. We were trying to figure out how it would leverage some use cases. I think a common mistake is to try to just build something on AI and say like, oh, we built something, but like, how do you marry that with the actual problem that you need to solve? So of course, a lot of the problems we need to solve are around data. The technology is evolving in the last like year or so since we've been building on it, obviously, but like it wasn't super great at math to start with, right? So, people who didn't understand the technology were like, well, Karen, like we want to do this, we want to ask these questions, we wanted it to do, it was almost like it was going to crunch a bunch of data for you. And I was like, it wasn't there yet. That's not the sweet spot of the technology. And so I think you really have to figure out what can the technology enable? And then, how do I leverage it? And if I can't leverage a certain way, how do I build around it to take what it can do versus what it can't do? And I'm talking about traditional, or I'm talking about the large language models where when these things came out, like people thought I could just do all sorts of stuff.
They're magic.
Yeah, it's like magic, but it's really the sweet spot was really around like words and creating content or creating
right
natural language, but not so much like the crunching of data. So for us, we had to take that and use parts of it, but also layer in other adjacent services to make those outcomes for our supply chain analysts, for example.
I think people with AI, they don't recognize that a large language model is like an English grad.
Yeah.
And ask them to do calculus. Like they have
this
calculus thing you speak of.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. And then I also think about in terms of launching something that's very bleeding edge, cutting edge technology is you have to sort of be wary of what it's going to do. There's a little bit of a lack of control, right? When you have these LLM technologies. And so caveating of and scoping the problem so that you're not, recommending things that are going to be problematic, having human reviews, et cetera. And so for us, as we're thinking about our AI initiatives going forward, it's really around what can we automate versus what does need some human approval. There's anything to do with cost implication, for example, if we're upgrading shipping, for example, someone's got to kind of okay that. Otherwise, there's real dollar spend that is being impacted that I don't want an AI to not, a human has to kind of approve that.
Well, and it's interesting. I like the perspective of you have to have the right tool for the right job. So large language models, the kind of the current definition of AI fit a certain type of job. Machine learning pattern recognition can fit a different type of job.
Yes.
I think part of what you're also saying though is the humans, you have to find the right job for them too. And a lot of it boils down to the one thing AI really doesn't have yet and probably won't for a long time. And that's curiosity, the ability to ask the right question.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I think especially in high touch businesses, and I think of supply chain as a high touch business. You're not just buying it. It's not purely one transaction. I bought something and then oh, I'm done.
Right.
I think that there is definitely areas where you just want a quick answer, and that's where AI can help you. And then there's areas where you need the judgment, the expertise, and the personal attention of a person. And so as a strategy from an industry like, at Flowspace, I really think there's going to be a mix of where AI can be helpful and help us scale and create a better experience, but then also having people that help support our customers as well. I don't think that's ever going to change. There's always going to be people, running operations.
JL and I are huge supporters of a human-centric approach. I mean, our company is centered, so human-centered. I think that gets to another question that I have, which is realizing that human beings are in the center of that innovation space and that human beings are the ones that are curious. How do you create a culture of innovation for a team? How do you help those humans to innovate better and more?
Yeah. That's interesting because I think one of the things that the challenges I faced when I got to Flowspace was there was like a lot of top-down decision making. I think that was just kind of a lot of companies kind of fall in that trap a little bit. It's not like people there weren't people in the organization had really good ideas, but they necessarily didn't feel like they had the avenues to communicate that, to impact decision making. So for me, one aspect is, you could have these like formal like meetings where everyone comes and talks about the voice of the customer. But that's like too heavy-handed, especially in an organization, depending on the size of the organization. For me, it's like building relationships internally, not just with like, my team, making sure that I'm hearing, because they're closer to all the things going on in the business than I am. And so I really, really prioritize one-on-one time, time where we get together and just talk about all sorts of things that they're hearing from the business and what's going on and what they think are the main challenges, but also working with like stakeholders within the organization that have different perspectives. We have our operations leaders and then our, account management teams. And then we have our sales folks so it's kind of like the front lines and just making sure we are talking to them and understanding and like bubbling that up. And then, so that's one aspect of just understanding all the problems and understanding what's going on in the business and having those relationships where there's an open dialogue. But then I also think it's about like surfacing them in a way where we can make really good decisions around it. So I think a lot of it is around, and I hate the process for the sake of process, but there's a little bit of process just to have like a cadence of conversation of, hey, every month we're going to talk about what we're working on. What's the data we're seeing, what we're hearing from the market. And every quarter we're going to reevaluate our priorities. And of course that can change as a startup. You're very agile, but like, I think there's like the right level process and just making sure like people are feeling heard and people feel like they can input into the broader decision making. And then something I also like really, really subscribe to is just seeing what other people are doing in other industries and taking inspiration. And maybe I will like bring that back to other people and be like, hey, this is interesting. Look what they're doing. Like, should we do something? Like, how does that apply to our business? Yeah.
I think when I listen to what you're saying, like part of what I hear is, one, ensure you have the diversity of thought required to explore the space. Two, have enough process in place that people know what to expect, but no more than that. Because one of the ways you help people feel safe is by letting them know what they should expect and like what's coming up. And then the third, which may be one of the best ones, is help show people how the contributions they're making are contributing to the decision. Like show how they're making a valuable contribution, because when they feel valued, that means they're going to do it again. So I think like if I'm summarizing what you're saying correctly, like those are the things that jumped out to me.
Yeah. And I'm also trying to model the creativity and the curiosity aspect by like looking at what other people are doing and like showcasing like, hey, did you see this? Like maybe we should do this, or how does this apply to our industry? Like kind of just creating that dialogue where people can like feel like they can brainstorm, even and not have like a dedicated brainstorming session, but just like these like little micro moments where you can like just share ideas.
Yeah.
I think one thing reading between the lines here is that too many organizations think that culture is the formal aspect. It was the leader getting up and talking about, here's our culture in a big company meeting. What you're describing is culture in the micro moments. It's the informal stuff that actually the culture. It's having those relationships. It's having those small moments of innovation and not having the deep, heavy bureaucracy and process that get in the way of it. That's truly the culture of innovation. I love that. As a final question for you, Karen, what do you want to leave with people as a takeaway? What's something that you want them to know from the conversation today?
Great question. Sometimes I've worked with people and they think that they can't make change, because they think, oh, I'm not a leader in the organization, or I don't have a voice or whatever. And I want you to know that that's not true, that you always have a voice and that you can always make yourself heard. It's just about finding the right way to do it. Because I think it's creating, figuring out who is a person that you could kind of share ideas with that could hear you out, give you good, back and forth on pressure testing it a little bit. And then if that person can help you drive that change, and finding people that are kind of sort of allies and helping you drive the change that you believe in. Because I do get that. I have worked with quite a few people where I've heard oh, we've been doing it forever like this and nothing's going to change. It's let's figure that out. Let's figure out how to do that. And, and it's getting people in with you to figure out how to make that change. And that's when things happen. I think I truly believe that at startups. Maybe bigger companies is a little different story, right? But especially smaller startups, everyone, especially in the kind of the efficiency of the current market, everyone is supposed to be a heavy hitter. We need people that really care about the business and all hands on deck. And so I think people who want to drive change, they can't do it. It's possible.
That's wonderful. I think that's a great thing to leave people with. Karen, thanks again for the wonderful conversation and for your insights today. I'll speak for JL, but we've really enjoyed having you. This has been great.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed being here as well. Thank you so much.
For everybody else who joined us listening into the podcast today, thanks for staying until the end. We hope that you find some value from the day. As normal, if you can just think of one thing to take from this conversation and then go and apply it, we'd love to hear your experience, hear what you've done, hear how it worked, or even some challenge that you've had. And as normal, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening to the podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Breakthrough Innovation.